to Packard Record. Willis, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It tells me that everybody's feeling a little better today, so that's good news. I'm glad to do that for you. We're ready to continue on. Mr. Hilson, you want to call your next witness?
Well, I think Detective Casher was on the stand when we left.
Oh, that's right, yeah, correct. You're still under oath, Detective?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
All right. Okay. Okay, Lieutenant, I think where we left off when we broke for the day, I was handing you People's Exhibit 199. That is, what is that exhibit, please?
It's a Carfax report for vehicle history report for a 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan SE. VIN number 1, D. David 4, G. George, P. Paul 24, R. Robert 66, B. Boy 734723.
And that vehicle is the one that is, or was, I guess, owned by the defendant during the time periods we're talking about. Is that correct?
That's correct. Based on the records that he bought it, and in our lien check with the plate number, comes back to the 2006 Dodge Caravan registered to Jeffrey Willis with that VIN number.
And does it also contain, outside of everything else that a Carfax report contains, does it contain information as it relates to date of purchase and maintenance?
Gives a date of purchase and different owners, and then it gives a detailed history throughout. So where and when and what was worked on and that kind of stuff.
Now, do we have, or do you have, does it indicate when that vehicle was purchased, I guess? I guess the better question is the date of purchase of the last owner. Is there an entry for under Van Annel Flickema?
There is March 28th. Title registered issued, new owner reported. 2013, I'm sorry, March 28th, 2013.
Okay. Now, is there also some service records, in particular as it relates to any brake work?
Yes, sir. So it would be February 19th, 2014, by Pep Boys on Alpine Township, Michigan. Brake calipers replaced, brake fluid flushed, changed, brakes checked, rear brakes replaced.
So Pep Boys on Alpine replaced the brakes in that van?
On February 19th, 2014.
Okay. Thank you.
And then we had one other entry after that.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the other entry?
Sorry.
I apologize.
It's March 31st, 2014, same place, Pep Boys on Alpine. Brake fluid flush, changed, brakes checked, clutch master cylinder replaced, front brake pads replaced.
All right. Give me 1 second here, Lieutenant.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 201. Are you familiar with that photograph, sir?
It's a booking photo of Mr. Jeffrey Willis.
And that was his booking photo based on his arrest in May of 16, is that correct?
That's correct.
And how would you classify his facial hair?
Facial hair, based on the picture, is a lot lighter than what it is now, a lot less full. I'd say a little bit more scruffy than it is full.
Okay. And is it safe to say, sir, this was taken from the jail, the Muskegon County Sheriff's Department system? Is that correct?
This was taken from the Muskegon County Sheriff's Department system, yes, sir.
Okay. I want to talk about the other thing that you did, going to People's Exhibit 119. In particular, during the course or after you made some connections to a couple of locations. Certainly you knew of the route of this van from the Exxon station the night that Jessica Herringer went missing. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, based on the statements of Ms. Follett, Mr. Barber, and then I guess we call it the mattress store, but the May Center, and going up northbound on Grand Haven Road, passing Old Homestead and Boyer Coins. You know, you could see that this is the same van going in that direction.
Now, after May of 16, the address 3038 Bailey became important. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And why was that?
Well, we knew that at that point in time, Mr. Willis's grandfather used to live there and passed away in 2011, and he was, I don't know, he's not executive of the state, but he was taking care of the house and had been to the house. Based on the van route, and then the statements that were given by him to Corporal Hare and Sergeant Baker, and then I'm looking at those statements that was at the tip that they had written down, and looking at Sergeant McDonald's phone records. The phone records, obviously, when he testified, showed that a couple calls were done around 11:23 p.m. on April 26, and then there was multiple calls after that, which showed that he was at the address. You know, in my mind, in testimony from Sergeant McDonald, he was at that house, 3038 Bailey. So it was under my understanding or my belief that when he left the Points Mall, passing going northbound on Grand Haven, he went directly to 3038 Bailey that night, April 26th.
So did you drive that route, I guess?
Yes, I mean, after knowing the route and knowing the location and how the information's come to me, I decided to, about 11 o'clock, mid-June of 2016, I started the route basically right next to Firehouse Guitars, coming off that service drive, then going northbound on Grand Haven Road, going to Seaway Drive, getting on Seaway Drive, making a right onto Getty, going northbound on Getty, and then taking a right on Summit, going eastbound on Summit, and then taking a right on Bailey into the driveway 3038 Bailey.
Now, you chose 11 o'clock at night because that was, well, let me ask you this. Why did you choose 11 o'clock at night to do this?
Well, I was looking at 11 o'clock at night, about 11:03 in that time frame, because that's basically the time that the witnesses and the videos have shown that this van was going at that point in time.
And
of course, that's when we believe that Ms. Herringa was abducted.
now, did you drive the speed limit?
I drove 35 miles an hour, yes, sir.
And how would you describe traffic at that time of night in that area?
Traffic was very light. By that time, a lot of businesses are closed other than the cinema Carousel, but everything's pretty light, and the Shell gas station. Lights turned blinking at that point. So you have a little different traffic pattern and light selection at that point. So that's why I chose that night. That's the time frame.
And you heard testimony from Ryan Keyhouse that from the Exxon to Bailey, that's the most direct route. Would you agree with that assessment?
Being a police officer for our department for 28 years and being on the road for about 20 of those years, I'm very familiar with routes and getting places really quick. And that's basically, I mean, anytime we have a call up in East Broadway or on Summit in that area, that'd be the route we take. Yes, sir.
Okay. And about how long did it take you to go from that point on Old Grand Haven to the house on Bailey?
I would estimate between 12 and 13 minutes. when I got right into the driveway.
Okay.
And if you want to add on a couple more minutes, just for the sake of it, 15 minutes at the worst, but you're talking about 12 or 13 minutes.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some statements that the defendant made, shall we? In particular, we've had some testimony from Detective Schultz about statements that he made during the course of the interview there, but he also made statements in another proceeding. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
And one that you were present for.
That's correct.
And one that I guess we have a transcript of. First and foremost, I want to talk to you about the toolbox that we've been talking about and the contents of that toolbox. Did the defendant make any statements as it relates to his knowledge of that toolbox and the contents and where it was?
He said that he had put the contents in the toolbox and placed it into the, he was going to place it in the shed, but ended up placing it in the van.
All right. Did he say anything about the lock on the box itself?
He said he was the one that put the lock on it.
Now, as it relates to, we've had some testimony and seen the exhibits of the injection site map that's been taped on the, I guess, back of the front lid.
Yes, sir.
Did the defendant make any statements in regards to that?
Question asked if he was the one that put it on there, and he stated, I did.
Now, although it's been, I think, pretty well documented and stipulated to, but did he indicate whether or not he was the owner of this particular 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan that we've been talking about?
He did. He said that 2006 Dodge Caravan was his, or that he drove that. Yes, sir.
Now, as it relates to April 26, 2013, we had some testimony about a statement he made to Sergeant Hare, Corporal Hare and Sergeant Baker about going to the Exxon station earlier in the day. Did he confirm that in this particular statement?
Yes, he said that he had been at the Exxon station probably around 5 o'clock p.m. that night on April 26, 2013, and I believe he stated that he bought some mints.
Okay. As it relates to Madison Nygaard and the conversations about her incident, did the defendant make any statements in regards to when he first saw her?
He did. I'd be paraphrasing it. Could I read it directly?
Certainly. I'm on page 56 if you've got. And it's line 10 through 12.
I just don't want to paraphrase it.
Yes, sir.
Said, question is, why don't you go back a couple paces here? Why, when you first see her, and what Mr. Willis said is, I was on River Road, it would be heading west.
So he first sees Madison as he's driving west on River Road, according to his answer.
According to his answer, yes, sir.
All right. Now, does he make any comments about what was going on in his head prior to him picking her up? And this is on page 57, starting at line 7.
Question was, and what did you do when you saw her? The answer by Mr. Willis was, well, at first I thought I should stop, but she wasn't quite where I needed, and she was on the other side of the road. So I turned down Weber, and I thought, well, I'll go and see if she needs any help.
So, in that particular answer, he first starts answering the question, at first I thought I should stop, but she wasn't quite where I needed.
Correct.
And then continues on with his answer.
That's correct.
Now, at some point in time in this statement, does he admit to actually picking Madison up?
Yes, he does.
Okay. And at some point in time in this statement, does he indicate a time with his encounter with her where she actually does, in fact, jump out of the vehicle?
Yes, he said that she freaked out and jumped out of the vehicle while it was still moving.
Okay. Now, as it relates to the computers, is there any statement by the defendant about that ASUS tower that we've talked about here in this case?
He says the ASUS tower was the one that he used, the one that was at his home. Yes, sir.
And how about as it relates to the 2 Western Digital hard drives? Did the defendant make any statement as to his knowledge and use of those?
He said that he used them both. One of the reasons why is one didn't seem to be working quite right. I don't know if it was low percentage or what, but that's why he had the second one.
Now, we've had some testimony and actually have marked as an exhibit this serial killer list. And did the defendant make any statements during that time about his knowledge of that?
He said that while he was at work, in regards to Miss Herringa, that there was a lot of rumors flying around. And a coworker of his, they wanted to look at some serial killers. And since his coworker was a temp worker, didn't have access to the computers, I'm assuming at work, and he printed up the list. He said, I printed up the list, and it was around lunchtime.
Okay. As it relates to that address at 3038 Bailey, did the defendant make any statements in regards to whether or not anybody had been or was living at that residence after 2011?
He stated there wasn't anybody living in that residence. After 2011, nobody was there.
Okay. As it relates, and again, we've had some testimony and photographs of the 3 points of entry at that house that had been padlocked. Did the defendant make any statements in regards to his knowledge of those?
I think it was your direct questioning, asking him if he put the padlocks on those doors, and he stated, I did.
Okay. And did he say anything about having a key to those?
He had the key, yes, sir.
Okay. Again, we've had some testimony, and it's seen the exhibit of that particular note that was found in the garbage can at Bailey. Did the defendant make any statements in regards to that?
I think a direct questioning by you was that, did you write this note? And he stated that he did, even including the upper portion, bottom portion of that note.
So, and did he admit to, essentially writing all, bits and pieces of the specifics from the clothing part to the middle part with the gas can and matches, and then all the restraint and other items on the bottom half?
Yes, sir. There was multiple questions you were asking off a list about the gloves and the panties, and he would respond, I did. Yes, sir, I did. All the way down. He wrote them down.
All right.
Including the restraint board and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Now, was there any questioning in regards to his performance, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it, during his interview with Detective Matt Schultz and Detective Stasiak? In particular, did he make any comments as to how he was answering questions?
Well, when they were, as far as the first part, when they were asking him about Madison Nygaard, the investigation dealing with Madison Nygaard when he was taken into custody at that point, and they're asking if he was up there, I don't know the round of questionings, but they were talking about that day. He said he wasn't there, and when you asked, you were lying to them about it, he phrased it that he was being evasive with the officers.
Okay.
And not lying, but evasive was his quote.
as it again, we've had some testimony and seen the records as it relates to that VIX file and the contents of all the subfolders. Did the defendant make any statements in regards to his knowledge of that and whether or not he had created any of that?
The question was did he create the VIX files? That was by both Mr. Johnson on their direct and then your indirect there, and he stated he did. That he had placed all the pictures in there. He created the sub-files, so all the photos that were in there, any phone records that were in there, he was the one that did it.
Okay. Was there any statements by the defendant as it relates to the huge collection of abduction, torture, rape, kill videos?
Yes, sir. He made this statement when those questions were asked. An explanation form, he was saying that him and his wife were no longer involved in sexual relations and that it was a, quote, outlet for him.
Okay. And do you recall whether or not the defendant made any statements about the secret videotaping of the neighbor girls?
You asked directly that, did you secretly tape the video of the girls, his neighbor girls? His response was, I did.
How about any statements related to the secret videotaping of Michelle's Nutella?
Your objection, Your Honor. May we approach? I understand. Okay, sir.
You withdrawing your
I
objection?
am withdrawing my objection.
Okay. So my question was, did the defendant make any statements in regards to the secret videotaping of Michelle's Nutella, his co-worker?
He said he did do it along with her lover or boyfriend. Yes, sir.
Okay. And how about as it relates to the secret videotaping of the swim meet? In particular, any statements regarding his taping, specifically the genital buttock breast area of these girls?
He said he did. It was in that tape.
We've had some testimony and seen the photographs of that Century safe that was found underneath the driver's seat. The safe was the one that contained the gun and the insulin and the needles and some other things. Did the defendant make any statements in regards to his knowledge of that particular safe?
He did. He said that it was, I believe, an emergency kit placed there. The needles, everything was for an emergency type situation, maybe for his wife, except for the gun. He didn't put that in there for the emergency, but it was in there.
That leads to my next question. Did he make any statements in regards to using that lockbox for the P-22?
He placed the P-22 in that lockbox, yes, sir.
He admitted to that.
He did.
Now, as it relates to the P-22, this was part of Detective Schultz's testimony. Did the defendant make any statements specifically about the direct questions that were asked of him during that interview in regards to owning any other guns besides the registered Bursa?
They were talking about the gun that he had registered, the Bursa. I believe the question, paraphrasing, but the question was, do you own any other guns? Or do you have any other guns? And he answered no.
And did he indicate in any additional statements as to whether or not he did that deliberately and intentionally or mistakenly?
He says he deliberately told the officers no.
In other words, he deliberately lied
Correct.
about that particular handgun.
About that particular handgun. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Judge. I have no further questions of Lieutenant Cash.
Thank you. Good morning, Lieutenant.
Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Are you okay? You need water or anything this morning? Oh.
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. We have, and since it's up there, we'll start with that so that we can, you have that photo in front of you, the one, the aerial view of the locations where you were able to recover video. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the bottom of the video, for those of us who are directionally challenged, is south, and the top of the video is north. Is that correct?
Yeah. So here's the Exxon and the Sternberg, and then if you're going this route.
I got that part. I just want to make sure we all on the same page. The
Yes,
bottom of the
you're
video-
going northbound.
Okay,
Yep.
so the bottom of the slide will be south, and the top will be north.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get to.
Correct.
North of the last place where you found video, what are the metropolitan areas north of that spot? Is the city of Muskegon north of that?
Yes, sir.
Any other metropolitan areas?
Muskegon Heights.
Okay. Any others? North of there? North Shores or anything like that?
Well, that part, yes. I mean, when you're going northbound on Grand Haven Road, you're traveling through Norton Shores.
Okay.
You get on Seaway, it's still Norton Shores. You get on Getty, you go up about to Norton, that's still Norton Shores on the east side. Then you're getting in on the west side would be Muskegon Heights. And then you get up to Sherman and you start crossing over, then you're getting into the city of Muskegon.
Okay. And as you look at the path of where you found the video, to my right is a system of highways. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What highway is that?
31.
Is there does a person, if they continue north, would they be able to get on to 31 from it going in that direction that they're going north? Is there another
Yeah.
entry spot?
To get onto 31, sir?
Yes, north of where the photograph ends. You understand? Let me rephrase it. I do that. Anytime I ask a question that makes no sense at all, which happens frequently, let me know.
That's fine.
Okay. The top of the photograph is the
Yes,
third location of video.
Yes, sir.
Now, beyond that, there isn't a photograph. We can't see what's beyond that.
Okay.
So what I'm asking is, if a person were to continue on the path that you have them there,
Yes,
is
sir.
there a point at which they could enter on US 31?
Yes, sir. There is.
Okay. Do you know of any, and back in 2013, this is a long time ago, but there's nothing, as long as the street's not blocked, there will be nothing to keep a person from turning right, left, or even coming back the way they came. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All righty. Could we bring up the booking photo of Mr. Willis, please? Okay. Do you have the exhibit in front of you?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. When you look at it seems to me, and that the photo, the actual exhibit, is not to scale. It seems to be, his face seems to be projected wider than what's even in that photo in front of you on the video screen. Do you get that impression, or am I just seeing things there?
My interpretation is this photo is a little bit wider.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, I think that's the last I want for the videos. So let's do some backtracking here. A couple things. How long have you been in law enforcement?
About 28 years.
Okay. And is it safe to assume that your first day as a rookie, you weren't a lieutenant detective?
No, I was not. I was on the road.
All right.
Patrol.
You're a patrolman,
Yes, sir.
and you rose up through the ranks through hard work and effort.
Yes, sir.
All right. Perseverance.
Yes, sir.
And during the course of that time, you've had a lot of experience as a police officer, a law enforcement officer, correct?
I'd like to think so.
And along that period of time, you would I would imagine, gone to a training or two.
Been to a lot of training, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And here, let me get to the point why I'm asking that stuff. Given your experience, given your training, have you ever seen what heroin looks like.
Yes, sir.
Can you describe now? Does it always look the same, or does it come in different colors and shapes and sizes?
Well, obvious. I mean, the more you buy,
No,
bigger-
I meant
or the more you get, the bigger the change. But you get it's usually a brown type substance or an
Okay.
off-white type substance. Yes, sir.
that's
in
what I was
powder
asking.
form.
Good. I didn't have to tell on myself here. Okay, so on occasion heroin comes in. Sometimes can be brown in color.
That's correct.
You have had the opportunity to see and review Ms. Herringa's journal. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Do you remember the point in the journal where she talks about my quote brown extracurricular end quote?
Yes, sir. I do.
Okay. Based on your training and experience as a law enforcement officer, when you saw that particular quote, did you get an impression as to what she was referring to when she said brown extracurricular?
My interpretation of that.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I did.
What is that interpretation, sir?
My interpretation, and also goes into my investigation, but is that it was heroin
Okay.
that she was possibly referring to.
All right, thank you. Based on your training and experience as a law enforcement officer, do you know how illegally purchased heroin is illegally consumed by a purchaser? How do they consume it? Do they rub it on the skin? Do they
I see what
snort
you're
it?
saying. Okay. I know a couple different ways. One is the most is they kind of cook it and then they inject it, and then other ways is snorting it.
Okay, and when you say injected, you're talking about a hypodermic needle into a vein?
That's correct.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's talk about you had an exhibit 199. I don't need to see it. 199. The Carfax exhibit. Do you remember that one?
Yes, sir, Attorney.
Okay. And that Carfax, it notes when the brake work was done on the vehicle owned by my client. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does that Carfax note any times when my client may have performed mechanical services on that vehicle himself?
I don't believe so. No, sir.
Have you ever seen a Carfax that noted where an individual notes that, hey, I changed the transmission, or I put new brakes on it, or I rotated the tires? Anything along those lines?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
So what the Carfax will note is that when the vehicle is professionally serviced, that's when it notes it. Is that correct?
I believe so.
All right. I assume you have a home, and I'm also assuming that on occasion you've attempted to perform what I would call handyman repairs and whatnot to your home, that sort of thing. On occasion. Never?
The problem is, Mr. Johnson, my wife's probably watching this, and I don't want to be lying.
Okay, I understand. Hypothetically speaking, if a hypothetical person were to perform handyman duties on his or her home, might it be possible that a handyman, this hypothetical handyman, might get in a little bit over his head and not perform the repair that he or she'd hoped for?
That could be, sir. Yes.
And might that person, hypothetically speaking, not anyone like yourself, hypothetically speaking, might that person then turn to someone who knows what they're doing to fix it the way it was supposed to be fixed?
Yes, sir.
Let's see here. Were you aware of the rallies or vigils that were being held for Ms. Herringa?
Yes, I was.
How often would they be held, would you say? How many times just off the top of your head, I know that I didn't ask you to count them, how many times would you think you've heard about a vigil or an anniversary being celebrated for Ms. Herringa?
I'd say about maybe 3 or 4 that I know of.
All right. And these vigils were Find Jessica vigils sort of things?
Yes, sir.
All right. Do the at Herman Miller they have a third shift. My guess is police officers often work at night.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You have an equivalent of third shift, or is it 12 on and 12 off sort of thing?
For a while there, I used to work 10 at night to 6 in the morning. That was our third shift. And then we switched over to 12s in 1996. So our third shift technically was 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
How long were you on third shift?
19 years.
19 years. Perfect. After 19 years, did you find your body metabolism changed a little bit? In other words, did you find it difficult to sleep at night when your day's off and your body would still be on third shift thinking you had to be awake?
Me personally, I was always tired. So, and it was just because, I didn't adapt to the changes.
Okay.
My days off, I would get up. You have small kids. It's hard to keep your pattern the same.
I see.
So I always felt that I was always tired, so I could always lay down and sleep anytime.
Thank you. All righty. Let's talk about back to your training. Even as a patrol person, though, when you first broke in as a rookie, and you had your first assignment, you knew that when you went to a crime scene, not to disturb the crime scene. Is that correct? I mean, you were taught, don't touch stuff, don't move stuff, don't pick stuff up, that sort of thing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's uniform through police officer training. Officers are taught, don't disturb the crime scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you, back on the 26th, 27th, I guess it would have been by the time you got there, of April 2013, did you ask for videotapes when you, when Fred Sermon arrived? Did you ask him for videotapes or anything along those lines?
Yes, sir. That was the first thing I asked for.
Okay. And do you call what happened when you asked him for those videotapes?
They didn't have any video anywhere on the premises.
All right. Now, how long had you been there before Mr. Sermon got there and you asked him for the video? Or was he already there when you got there, if you remember?
I believe I was called there, and by the time I got there, he was not there yet.
Okay.
But he was on his way.
All right. So you had a chance to walk around, see the scene yourself a little bit?
Yes, sir.
And then he gets there, and that's when you ask him for the videotapes?
I think I asked right when I got on the scene, but
Okay.
I think I asked that the first question was to Ms. Follett, because she is, the store personnel, and she was the first one that told me that there was no video, and then I confirmed it with Mrs. Sermon.
Got it. Thank you. Let's see. Were you informed that Ms. Herringa had a cut on her forehead that she received a couple of days prior to when you arrived?
I was given information that she might have, that there was possibility that she had a cut on her forehead, possibly cut by a cappuccino machine.
Okay.
But I could not verify that from anybody. There was no work records, no medical records. There was nothing at the scene, like inside, and there was no driplets leading from the outside door to the blood itself. Co-workers never heard anything like that, and of course Dakota and her friends never told me anything that. And I asked those direct questions if they ever heard that, and that nobody said they've never heard anything like that.
How many days prior to her going missing did this rumored incident occur?
A couple days.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I think that as Mr. Hilson asked you earlier, you were at the previous trial in this particular matter,
That's correct.
and some of the questions he asked of you were questions that were based on what you heard of the testimony of Mr. Willis at that previous trial,
That's correct.
and there's been a transcript produced of that. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Just let's make sure we're on the same page. Can you tell the jury what a transcript is?
Transcript is what I'm doing now. So after they're done, it's typed in. So any question he asks me and I answer, it's a written document for the courts.
Okay. And it's common, and it's not. There's nothing wrong with using a transcript to refresh your recollection if you don't remember a question or answer clearly. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In fact, it happens all the time.
That's correct.
Both sides use that method to refresh recollections, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when Mr. Hilson asked you questions about what Mr. Willis has said, have you had a chance to let's see, that trial took place in October, did it not?
October, end of October until November. Yes,
Have you
sir.
had the opportunity to read a transcript to refresh your recollections as to what Mr. Willis said at trial?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So let's go through a couple of questions I have about it. One of the questions, well, let's see if you remember. Do you remember Mr. Willis being asked about how he came to acquire Ms. Shanatella's handgun and panties?
Yes, sir.
What do you recall Mr. Willis testifying?
He testified that he was a co-worker of hers and that she sold him the gun for, I believe, $150. He paid it to her, and that's how he came in possession with the gun. We're talking about the P-22.
That's
Walker,
correct.
right?
Yes, we're talking about the 22.
That's what was said to her, or
Okay.
said.
And the panties?
The panties, there was a running joke. They had been together a long time, not together intimately, but working together a long time. And the joke was, there was a running joke because they saw a show together, or they'd seen a show, and he asked for her panties and she gave it to him.
All right. Do you remember? Well, I'll strike that. Well, yeah, I might as well ask him. Do you remember Mr. Willis being asked about the basement, having his grandpa Ham's basement, having water damage? Do you remember that conversation at all?
I remember the conversation, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember what Mr. Willis's explanation for? Well, I guess it's for the bleach. Do you remember what he said was, here's why the bleach was used for? Or strike that.
I do not know. I don't
Because
remember
I'm not
that.
sure that's what it says.
I don't remember that.
Tell us what you remember about Mr. Willis saying that the basement was flooded.
I'll be honest with you. Now that, I was taking it in other conversations, but I don't remember what he described on the stand that day.
Do you remember the time frame? Do you remember when he said it happened as opposed to?
Sometime in 2013.
Okay. Do you remember in reference to Ms. Herringa, was it before she went missing or after, as far as he testified?
I don't know, sir. I can't remember that.
Why don't I try to bring it up and refresh your recollection? Also.
Okay.
We'll do that refreshing thing. No, you won't. That's not it. 9 and 10. Up here, the second line. I see what the page is. One moment, sir. Approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Thank you. Lieutenant Casher, you know how this works. If you will
Yes, sir.
do me a favor and start with the first sentence on this particular page and just read the page down to line 925 for us.
In 2005,
No, not
I'm
loud,
sorry.
not
Whoops.
loud. To yourself. I left that.
Oh, you wanted me to read that,
I was
right?
just trying to make you look silly.
Oh, all right.
I'm sorry.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, sir.
You good?
Yeah, you wanted me to go down to 25, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want you to refresh your recollection
Yes,
as
sir.
to that particular conversation. Did that help you remember what was
Yes.
testified to on that occasion? Okay.
Yes,
let's-
sir.
Let's start over again. The time frame. Well, do you get an idea of the time frame when, like that? Did Mr. Willis say there was water damage or flooding in the basement of his grandpa's house?
Well, on the next page, he said, I stopped over to the house after the snow and pipe had broke off in the basement.
Okay.
And there was, like, I know, water in the basement.
Okay. Do you have any idea? Was there a time frame given as to when that event occurred?
March, I believe, March of 2013.
Okay. Thank you. All right. You've testified to a number of occasions where my client admits that he's not always truthful with law enforcement. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you ever get the... does he ever admit that he doesn't trust police as far as you can recall?
Yes, sir.
Does he ever make the allegation that the police lie? Do you remember that?
I don't know if it's quite that they lie, but he says that the police make mistakes, that we're all human.
Okay. Let's see. Now,
Yes, sir.
okay. Page 26. 26 here. Do you recall why he said he created the VIX file?
Based off of, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here,
Yes,
but
sir.
I believe that he made the VIX file is that after the first encounter or first the talking with Sergeant Baker and Corporal Hare, he thought that he should create the VIX file, and because if they needed something and they came back, he would have it. He would have it or something to that effect.
Do you remember why he didn't register the .22 gun?
He stated that after 2014, I believe, he didn't think you had to register the gun, or 2013, he did not have to register a gun.
Is that correct?
No, it's not correct.
A few more questions, and then I'm finished. Maybe you can help us while we're looking. How did Town and Country come up in terms of your investigations?
Town and Country came up, so initially that night, April 26th, or into the 27th, we were interviewing Susan Follett and Eric Barber. They were our only witnesses to this. And I always try to give the backdrop because at the time, we didn't know if she was missing or what was going on. But the van became a very important piece to us because that's where they said they saw her, based off the time frame after Susan Mosley. The blood and the laser part being found right by the van. Susan made the statement, it's just like my sister's van, a minivan. All right, that's kind of how it started that way. So we looked up sister's van, me personally, and it was a Town and Country. She says it's silver, there's no dents, there's no stickers. She made a good, accurate description. She goes, I don't know vans well, but she goes, it's exactly like my sister's. So the Town and Country kind of came on of its own for me. And, you know, we have 32,000 vans. I guess at that time, we were trying to limit it down to maybe 15,000, 10,000, whatever it is, and get some tips and hoping that maybe it got that way, or it went that way of a Town and Country, linking it up with a Walter 22 and all that other stuff. So that's kind of how it started, and it went from there. I then went to a Dodge dealership, not a Dodge person, not like Mr. Brooks, who was an expert, somebody that knew vans. I thought they knew vans, and they thought it could possibly be a Town and Country. Dealing with Eric Barber, we brought him in again, myself and Detective Sergeant McDonald, and we went over it a little bit more. We were hoping maybe he knew more about vans than his wife Susan. He thought it possibly could be a Town and Country. So from my perspective, I guess I was pushing, I went with a Town and Country instead of all the vans. I you know, that
And
was
in
my
fact, you
decision.
did a television interview where you mentioned the Town and Country in that as well?
Possibly, I don't know. I could have.
Detective Casher, obviously, police officers write reports, correct?
That's correct.
What I'd like to do is, what I'd like to do is, would you take a look at this document, please, and specifically the highlighted portion, the yellow portion?
Yes, sir.
Were you familiar with that document prior to me just showing it to you right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And well, let me ask you: is that the statement made there? Is that something that you wrote yourself, or is that somebody else provided that statement and you wrote and you read it?
Well, Dakota made the statement to me, and I wrote it down.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
Yes, sir.
So this was a statement from Ms. Herringer's boyfriend to you.
That's correct.
Okay, this isn't somebody's notes, and you're interpreting it. This is something from your notes.
Yeah, it was with my interview with him. Yes, sir.
Okay. And at any point during that interview, did Dakota, the boyfriend, indicate that Ms. Herringer had issues, had thought about leaving him?
Yes.
Okay.
In a simple answer, yes.
Okay. And is that what that note memorializes?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Wilson?
Yes, sir.
Speak to
Sure. Bless you.
Okay, we have a legal issue that needs to be discussed, and it might take a few minutes, so we're going to excuse the jury at this time. Please break. Come back. Okay, the jury's been excused from the jury room. Mr. Johnson, any sidebar conference here that you had a record you wanted to make regarding some trial strategy?
Yes, Your Honor. Without divulging too much, there's a line of questioning that I've been requested to make with this witness that is not, quite frankly, directly relevant to the trial strategy that I've developed
You've been requested to make it by whom?
by my client.
Okay.
Given that is his trial, I'm prepared to do that. But I do want to make a record that, at this juncture, I'm not sure that it's appropriate to our strategy, quite frankly. So, but however, he's the client, and I'm prepared to ask the questions. But I want to make sure the record is that this isn't the way I intended to go with this material.
Okay, and so your advice would be not to pursue this line of questioning?
At this juncture, yes, sir. I think it's appropriate for another occasion, but not for this one.
All right, so Mr. Willis, you've heard the advice of your counsel, you wish to overrule that, and you want to proceed with that line of questioning?
Yeah,
That's fine.
Pardon?
yes, I do.
Okay, now, he's telling you not to do this, and so if this doesn't turn out the way you want it to, you're not going to be able to claim that he was somehow not being a good lawyer by pursuing this questioning, because you're insisting that he do it. You understand that?
I understand that it's my decision.
Okay.
One final thing, Your Honor, along the same lines. Mr. Willis has drafted a letter for the court. I will be delivering that letter prior to closing. It's directed directly to Your Honor. In regards, it's a discovery issue. And we referred to it initially at the very beginning of trial, and I didn't submit those documents at that time. But my client wants this letter delivered, and therefore I will be, again, following his instructions, delivering the letter.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. That
Are
is.
we ready to proceed then?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. You want to call the witness? Can I see the attorneys up here just a minute?
Sure, sir.
we're in, I guess the jury's using the bathroom, so we're gonna proceed.
I get it.
Yeah, you need one?
I think there's a couple.
Thank you. May I approach, Your Honor? Mr. Casher, Detective Casher, my apologies. Would you take a look at these two documents that I set before you? Are you familiar with those documents, sir? Have you seen them before?
Yes, sir.
As I read them, one is supposedly authored by, is it yourself?
No, sir.
Is it Officer Baker?
There's one by Sergeant Todd Baker
Sergeant Baker, okay. And the second one is authored by whom?
and Corporal Hare.
But both are saved by you on the computer, is that?
That's correct.
Okay. The question I have, sir,
Yes, sir.
is that middle paragraph I'm pointing to there that says Jeffrey admitted. And if you look at both reports by two different authors, they're almost verbatim the same. Have you noticed that?
Well, yeah, okay.
Okay. So the question is, if those documents are written by two different people and apparently at two different times, how is it that they are so close to the same wording?
Because both of them are the ones that interviewed and talked to and were out at the scene with Jeffrey Willis.
And you'd expect that. I'd expect that if they were out and they did the interview together, they'd be similar.
I think they're pretty much should be almost directly, unless one of them was out there at different times,
Okay.
I would expect the reports to be very similar, if not together.
But these reports are virtually word for word, correct?
I wouldn't say word for word, there's differences, I mean, but to sit there and say you should be different, but you're both there together listening being at the investigation, doing the same thing, listening at the same time, they should mirror
Okay.
to me.
Once I complete my report, where does the report go? If I'm a police officer, if I'm Sergeant Baker, I complete a report, where does the report go?
Okay, just a general report?
Yeah, just like what you got in front of you.
Well,
Where does it
there's
go?
two different things here. One, you're talking about a supplemental report that's going into my investigation as opposed to a report that he generated, let's say a motorist assist, an accident, or an assault.
Well,
There's a difference here that you're looking at this one and then talking about a different report.
let me stop being sneaky here. Is it possible that one officer simply copied the report of another officer?
I wouldn't expect so.
I understand you wouldn't expect it. As a matter of fact, they're not supposed to, correct?
No, they don't need to.
They're supposed to be independent recollections. That's what's in the report, correct?
That's correct.
And so if one officer copied the report of another officer, that is not within procedure. Is that correct?
No, that's not procedure.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Line number 9. Okay. Let me ask you about this document here. It's another police report of notation of some nature, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would you look at line number 9?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember the testimony that my client told the police that his wife was not at home? When
I
they
don't
did-
remember if he said she wasn't at home or she was unavailable.
Okay.
I don't remember.
That particular document is more specific as to why she wasn't at the door. Is that correct? Or she wasn't interviewed, correct?
Well, no, that number, line 9,
Uh-huh.
is regards to April 26, not
Okay.
when they went out there and talked to her. So he made the statement that on April 26, she was sleeping.
Okay.
That's what that's referring to.
Thank you. One final thing. You heard, what's Dakota's last name?
Dyer?
Dyer, Mr. Dyer. You heard Mr. Dyer testify that he provided you with Ms. Herringer's journal, correct?
That's correct.
And I believe in our discussions, he informed the court, the jury, that you give him the diary back at some point, and he didn't know where it was. You remember that part?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But in the interim, you copied the journal, the journal, diary, whatever you want to call it.
That's correct. I did.
Okay. What I'd like to show you was proposed defense exhibit E. Would you take a look at that document, please, and thumb through it a little bit if it helps you recollect as to what it is? Or do you know what it is?
Well, yeah, I know this. I mean, this is the document that I printed off and gave to you.
Okay.
Is that correct?
That's the copy of the journal that you gave to me. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But there's certain exceptions. One that didn't have the clip on top, right, the black.
Yes,
clip.
sir. Didn't have the clip.
Second, it did not have the exhibit where it says Exhibit E, correct?
That's correct.
And third, the pages weren't numbered. My office put page numbers on there, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
You're right.
But other than those changes, as far as you can tell, is that the copy you made of that journal way back when Mr. Dyer provided it to you?
It looks so, yes, sir.
Okay. That being the case, Your Honor, I would move Exhibit E. Yeah.
No objection, Judge.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Exhibit E will be received.
All right. Just a couple more questions on those reports. Remember the report I showed you? You got the two of them there, and
Yes, sir.
have you noted in reading those two, that area where I told you where they seem to be identical, that even the typos are the same?
Well, that's imprinted though. I mean, the typos is, but when it transfers over from a thumb drive or from a Word, that's part of our system. I can't control RMS. I mean, that's kind of how it is.
Okay, but the question is, given the similarities and given the fact that the typos are the same, given the fact that they were processed a minute apart, do you have suspicion that those documents were not original to both officers, that one of them may have copied to the other?
No, because they gave me two separate thumb drives. I asked them to put it on a Word.
Okay.
Give them the thumb drives. And the reason why it was a thumb drive is, I mean, I have a book of a document. So prior to that, when it goes into this RMS, our final report, I kind of wanted it to have a flow to it.
Yeah.
So one document's in, and then 20 pages later, something else is in. And that's the problem with our RMS system. So I wanted to kind of keep it condensed of what was going on. And since I'm in charge of that investigation, I asked them both to give me separate thumb drives. So when you're saying it's a minute apart put in, that's by me doing that.
Inputted.
That's when it was inputted,
Alright.
and that was done by me.
Okay.
That's why you have investigator, supervisor, and all that kind of stuff. So all that is to believe that's the same. And when it comes to investigators, and they did exactly went out at the same time, if it was a separate, let's say that Corporal Hare went out at a separate time, then I would think that there should be something different. But they're both there at the same time. At that point in time, their notes, and they agree that that tip and that note, the notes on that tip, 268, when they came, looked at it, they both agreed that's what happened. And in fact, they were telling me about it.
You remember conversations to that effect?
Absolutely, I had conversations because tip 268, when we pulled that out after Mr. Willis was arrested, he made the statements to detectives, Stasiak and I think Schultz, saying that if this is about the Haringa deal, I've already been talked to. I get a call and said, or I believe either Schultz or Stasiak said, hey, you guys already talked to this guy. Unbeknownst to me, because I didn't know that, at that time back in 2013, I then asked, I believe, Detective Sergeant or Detective Swanker to pull up that tip, because he was the one inputting that. So he pulled it up, and he told me the information, and then I went back to Corporal Hare and Sergeant Baker, and I said, do you remember this?
Okay, so 268 is the anonymous
Yes, tip.
tip. You received only, and there's only one, you received, that came from one source, it's not.
That's correct. It came from one source. That's a great way of saying it. It came from one source.
Is it a a conglomeration of multiple tips, or is it somebody called in and this is what they said, and so, or is it like this is we got 5 tips, we put them all in 268?
No.
Okay.
268 was one tip,
Okay.
and it came through our front line,
Right.
which means somebody called our police department within that time frame when everybody was manning the phones. They wrote it down what the tip was,
All right.
the date, and then they turned it into, our task force.
And so the after 268 was received, it was viewed and followed up on, and
By Sergeant Baker and Corporal Hare,
The
they
rest is
followed up.
history.
And then, yes, the rest is history. They wrote it down, then it was typed in by our I know it was typed in by Detective Swanker at the time. He just was there and he's putting it in, inputting it.
Detective Capture, may I retrieve those documents from you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. You want the diary too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you.
Just a couple follow-up here, Judge. Lieutenant, I just want to follow up on a couple of things here. Mr. Johnson was asking you about a interview you did with Dakota Dyer, and didn't really give a lot of context to that. When did that interview take place?
The interview itself, the first interview with Dakota, when that was part of it, took place probably at 1:15 in the morning on April 27th at the Exxon gas station.
Did you have any idea at that point in time what happened to Jessica Herring?
At that point in time, we were still unraveling if she could have walked away, if she left, if she was abducted, or what was going on. We didn't know the background, and that's kind of the background story starting out. Everybody has the understanding or the belief that that was the call. If a person was abducted, and that's what we went out there for. That's not accurate. It was an open door, and then we started going through the process of trying to find out where Jessica Herring went to.
And in fact, isn't it true that you didn't really start thinking abduction until you talked to Susan Fowler?
Absolutely. Then you start putting the pieces together. Yes.
Now, the part of that statement that Mr. Johnson didn't ask you about, did Mr. Dyer also make a reference to the relationship that Ms. Herring had with her son?
Yes. I mean, it was one of those, she talked about leaving or better life or whatever, what their personal relationship is, but she would never leave her son. I mean, that was a quote, and he still stood by it forever.
Now, the only other line of questioning I just want to get out is, Mr. Johnson, I think early on in his cross-examination, you talked about your experience and knowledge dealing with drugs in law enforcement. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes, sir.
In particular, he asked some questions about heroin.
That's correct.
Now, you've been doing this for a long time, and I can't remember, it may have been before my time, but did you work with our state drug team for a period of time?
Yes, I was an undercover officer for a few years with the West Michigan Enforcement Team.
And in that time frame of that, and certainly through the course of your law enforcement career, have you come in contact with those who are battling and addicted to substances, in particular legal substances?
Yes, sir.
And in your experience in dealing with those folks, typically they get involved with law enforcement in a couple ways. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could be you catch them either possessing or using the substance they're addicted to.
Yes, sir.
Also, it could be for what other purposes? What other ways that you come in contact with these folks that are addicted?
There could be dealing it, undercover.
How about as it relates to property-related crimes?
As far as stealing and
Correct.
as far as larceny
Yes.
type situations,
Yes.
If you have a user or somebody that's addicted, obviously they're going through they don't want to go through withdrawals. So we have a lot that either does organized retail frauds or larcenies from homes, or breaking and entering, or stealing from their workplace, embezzlements.
And at some point in time, did you make a conclusion or come to the conclusion, or did you believe that Jessica Herring's disappearance was drug related?
We looked into that theory at one point because, as rumors fly, that her or Dakota or both of them owed thousands and thousands of dollars and they had a bad drug habit, and there's some tips that came in, something like that. We looked in depth and we talked to a couple people that, they have done some with, but we never found anything that she was actually addicted to a drug. Recreational, sure, but not addicted to it. And we never found that at any time that they owed money.
More importantly, going back to your initial direct exam yesterday, was there any money missing from the convenience store?
There was no money missing. There was no cigarettes missing. There was nothing in that store. That's what led us to believe. That's one of the things that we looked at that night, or I did, that believed that it was something else other than she was abducted. Drug dealers, especially in Muskegon County and West Michigan area, they don't want to abduct somebody. They want their money. And if she was involved in some type of a drugs or owed somebody, that cash register that you saw would have been empty. Her $400 out of her purse would have been gone, without a doubt. And all the money left there, it definitely was not drug related.
And in your experience, in particular, when you were undercover, do folks that use often trade items as a foreign currency?
Absolutely. That's what I call about organized retail fraud. Organized retail fraud for us is they go in and they steal something from Myers or wherever, and then they trade it on the streets or sell it or whatever it is to get the drug of choice.
And again, any product, anything of value that might have been traded for drugs missing from the Exxon station that night?
No, especially tobacco products would be a big thing, a couple packs of cigarettes and trade it off, but that they weren't missing. And throughout the whole time, this investigation was big. We never had a report from anybody at the store, or obviously Mr. Searman, who owned the store at the time. There was no reports of anything missing, and we checked back, periodically to see if there was anything that we missed, and there was nothing.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
This opportunity. Well, things I've been wanting to say. Anyway, Lieutenant Casher, were you here when Ms. Follett testified?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall her testimony that one of the reasons she doubled back that night is because she suspected that Ms. Herring was stealing from the store?
That's true.
I have no further questions.
Okay, we done?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Judge, the one thing I would move to admit People's Exhibit 201, which is the photograph.
Any objections?
No, sir.
Okay. Received.
And just so that I clean that this is a thing, I don't think I did, but I'm moving to admit Exhibits 1 through 201.
Okay. We've already covered them. I don't think.
Yeah, there was, and I got, there was a schematic done by the Secret Service agent that outlined his the things he'd done with the things he testified to, and I don't know. You know what you're
I know what you're talking about.
I don't have an objection to any of the others, Judge, and I may not have an objection to this one if I get a chance to see that.
Fred, let me see if I can find it here.
Then I believe you admitted exhibits A, B, C, D, and E.
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right, those will all be received.
Fred, it would be number 65.
Okay. You bring that up.
This one right here.
No objection.
All right, 1 through 201 and A through E are all admitted.
Your Honor, with that, people rest.
Okay.
Motion, Your Honor.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a legal issue that we're going to have to take up, and so I'm not going to keep you here because we're close to the noon hour, so I'll let you have an early lunch here. Can we... Okay, we'll resume at 1:30. Thank you. 1:30.
We don't have
Excuse me, Mr. Johnson?
Your Honor, I do. We move for a directed verdict not guilty on both counts on this particular matter, Your Honor. We understand that the court is to take the law, the evidence as to the most benefit of the prosecution. However, in this particular matter, the people have failed to show that have failed to provide for a body. Ms. Herringa has never been recovered. They failed to show that, quite frankly, that she's deceased. And that's where this entire case starts and ends. Without the ability to show that she's deceased, we believe that they have failed in their burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, obviously, that there's been a murder. We certainly, secondly, Your Honor, will point out that the linkage to my client is very slim and circumstantial. We don't feel it's supposed an opportunity to go to the jury with it. We think the people simply haven't supported their verdict in this particular matter, and we'd ask the court to direct a verdict of not guilty on both counts.
Okay.
Thank you, Judge. Well, as Mr. Johnson has stated the law, and the court's well versed in it, that the court must review this in the light evidence in the light most favorable to the people. Along the lines of Mr. Johnson's argument, first and foremost, the law doesn't require that the prosecution produce or show a body. That's pretty clear. Secondly, as it relates to whether or not she's deceased, certainly the court has been listening and paying attention to the testimony and the exhibits, but to highlight for the court a couple of things that allows this jury to make that ultimate call. First and foremost, we look at the condition of the store on the night at the time that Jessica Herringa was missing. We know from the testimony, including the last bit of testimony from Lieutenant Casher, that there wasn't a single thing disturbed in the store. Mr. Johnson, through his cross-examination of Dakota Dyer, was trying to paint Ms. Herringa as an individual who was, certainly not well off, living paycheck to paycheck, but also had a habit of using illegally controlled substance or illegal controlled substances, which require money. And in this particular case, as we look at what happened at the store, there isn't a penny missing. There isn't one item of product missing that would be of value either for her because she was a cigarette smoker or as a trade value for drugs. Secondly, she left behind her purse with every single piece of identification inside of it, including her own personal money, her car, and she walked away. If we believe the defense and not the theory that she's dead, she walked away and has left her son motherless for the last 4 years, which, according to the folks that knew her well, even including the writings that are contained within the diary that's now evidence, that her son was her life, and that she would not leave her son for any reason. Secondly, we have the testimony of investigative analyst Ryan Keyhouse from the Secret Service and his scan of life. In other words, looking at all sorts of databases from the local to the state to the national to the international in an attempt to see of any trace of her popping up, including using facial recognition through some of those partnerships. None of that has produced any positive information whatsoever that she is in existence at the local, state, national, or international level. We couple that, Your Honor, with when the defendant was arrested, he had a Walther P.22 handgun. We know, or at least the evidence has shown, and has shown in this particular trial and in the previous trial, that particular weapon was used to execute Rebecca Bletch. Both shell casings and bullet fragments match that gun. We also know that at the scene of the Heron gun investigation, we have a battery cover from a Walther laser sight, which in fact matches the Walther laser sight that was produced by Gary's guns that ultimately fit on Michelle's gun, and the cover fit on that particular laser sight. We also know that the defendant, that there's been evidence to show the defendant has a proclivity, if you will, for pretty dark pornography. That involves the abduction, the torture, the restraining, the raping, and the killing of females. And from Mr. McCarthy's testimony, we know that he was particularly interested in blonde females, skinny blonde females, which fits Ms. Herrington to a T. That, Your Honor, coupled with certainly the other pieces of evidence, there's plenty of evidence for the jury to make this connection. On top of, the only other highlight that I would give the court is this idea of silver van from Exxon, taking that right on Old Grand Haven Road, testimony and pictorial evidence of that van as it passed by those three businesses, including Mr. Brooks's testimony from the Boyer Coin video describing and identifying that van as a Dodge Grand Caravan manufactured in the years of 2001-2007, which directly fits into the defendant's, the vehicle that the defendant owned at the time, along with the fact that it was a direct route to this house on Bailey, which was unoccupied, and occupied by no one at the time of Ms. Herrington's disappearance, and the phone records that put him in the vicinity shortly after her abduction. Again, Judge, all that, in the light most favorable to the people, gives this court and the jury plenty to sink their teeth into to make that ultimate conclusion and come to a decision as to whether or not A, she's deceased, and whether or not B, the defendant had any role in that.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Okay. Well, the court applies the standard set forth by the Supreme Court of People versus Hampton. And the inquiry here is whether or not a reasonable, rational trier of fact could conclude beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant is guilty of the crimes of open murder and kidnapping. And in making that assessment, the court is required to consider the evidence in the light most favorable to the prosecution. So those are the standards that we operate by, and I think both sides agree those are the standards that should be applied in evaluating the viability of this motion. The evidence in this case is clearly and almost exclusively circumstantial evidence. We have a jury instruction that provides that the elements of an offense may be proven by direct evidence or circumstantial evidence or a combination of those, and that in fact elements may be proven exclusively by circumstantial evidence. In this case, the body of the alleged deceased in this matter has not been recovered. The defense has made an argument that in the absence of that, the court should grant this directed verdict. There are a number of cases in the state of Michigan that have addressed this issue with regard to a missing body, a homicide case. And recently, the Court of Appeals, albeit in an unpublished decision, but it incorporates published law in the unpublished decision. The jury was instructed that the elements of first-degree murder do not include a requirement that the actual body of the deceased person be recovered, provided the jury is convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that she is dead. Now, in the Fisher case, People v. Fisher, which is 193 Michigan Appeals 284, in granting a motion for directed verdict, the trial court noted that there was no evidence of any blood stains or a weapon linking the defendant to the victim's death. And the decision to dismiss the charges on a directed verdict motion was upheld. That is clearly not the situation that we have here. And that language implies that if there was that type of evidence, the motion should have been denied. And of course, that's what we have in this case. In this case, we have Ms. Herringa, who suddenly disappeared in about a 15-minute window, as I recall the testimony was between when I believe it was Ms. Mosley had been there, around 10 to 11, something like that, as I recall, and then about 5 after 11 on the night of her disappearance. As I recall it, Mr. Harpster was there. So there's about a 15 to 20 minute period. And during that period of time, she was seen by Ms. Mosley, and then when Mr. Harpster comes, she's gone. This is when the police get involved. Her car remains there. Her purse remains there. All of the things that were in the station remain there. The only thing that is missing is the body of Ms. Herringa at that point, which certainly a reasonable trier of fact would conclude that she did not leave that station of her own free will under those circumstances. The second thing that we have that I find to be important, it wasn't mentioned, is that behind the station where she was, there's a drop of her blood that's found on the pavement. A distinct difference from the Fisher case. A fact that was noted in the Fisher case that was absent. And as I said, suggests that if that's present, a directed verdict would not be appropriate. That indicates, or certainly would allow a trier of fact to conclude that Ms. Herringa was subjected to some sort of violent assault. We also know, based on the testimony of her co-worker, and I believe it was the co-worker's ex-husband. I don't want to get that wrong, but I believe it was her ex-husband. And that might still be her husband. I can't recall. But in any event, they were riding on a motorcycle at around the time that Ms. Herringa disappears. You can see a vehicle behind the station, the lid flipping open on the tailgate, and the lid coming back down. The person leaving in a van that looks like the one that ultimately was traced back to Mr. Willis. And the evidence with regard to that would certainly allow a trier of fact to conclude that Ms. Herringa was in fact abducted in that van. And of course, probably the most damning piece of evidence from the perspective of the prosecution is the fact that there is a cover to the battery assembly for a laser sight for a P-22 Walther handgun that is found a few feet away from this blood stain on the pavement at the gas station, and also some batteries associated with a laser sight. And that turns out to be a battery cover that would fit the laser sight that was sold to Ms. Schnotala, the gun that the defendant used to kill Rebecca Bletch. And that puts him in the bullseye of the circumstantial evidence that he is the one who was behind that gas station, flipped open the lid on that van, stuffed Ms. Harrington in the van, and took off with her. That is circumstantial evidence that would allow a jury to conclude that Ms. Harrington was kidnapped. The blood would allow the jury to conclude that she was the subject of a violent assault. The fact that she has been absent for, 5 years now, is important. The Phillips case, which was recently decided on appeal, noted that in that case, the baby in that case had been missing for about 7 years, and that was circumstantial evidence of death. In this case, Ms. Heron has been missing for over 5 years now, and there's been a intensive search for her whereabouts that has been fruitless. That is circumstantial evidence of her death. So that contributes to the circumstantial evidence of proof of open murder in this case. In addition, there is noted in that Phillips case, in 2018 Mishat Lex 1297, additional circumstantial evidence in the form of motive and consciousness of guilt. In this case, the motive for the defendant to undertake these crimes is circumstantially related in the thousands of videos of violent struggles leading to death, sexual assault of various victims that are found in his custody on his computer. That certainly provides a motive for him, circumstantially. There is consciousness of guilt in this case, as reflected in the so-called VIX files that were accumulated in the defendant's computer. So there are different layers of circumstantial evidence here of the charge of open murder as well as kidnapping. And the court is convinced that a rational trier of fact could, when considering this evidence in the light most favorable to the prosecution, conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the offenses of open murder and kidnapping, and therefore the motion for directed verdict will be denied. Okay, we're ready to proceed with instructions and final arguments, as I understand. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
If you want to just step back with me in chambers, and the court has got the revised set of instructions ready, and take a look at those. Okay. or we,
Let me back on the record, Your Honor.
we're still on the record.
I mean, once we look at the instructions, because otherwise they can take.
No, we're not gonna come back and we'll come back
Okay.
at 1:30 and you guys get off the line.